We're going to try and hit the generally emotional impact of all this stuff on kids. And so when Nick said we're going to have this conversation about the impact of technology on adolescents, it's kind of like having a conversation about the impact of adolescence on adolescents because it's just so tied into everything that they do. We've talked a lot about privacy and security, and I think as a parent, we all have the, I just want to make sure that what's going on out there is okay. I want to watch what they're doing. I want to be able to see what they're posting, which is great, and as parents, it's what we should do. But I tell my clients all the time, my teenage clients, back in the 80s, we had this really cool system that we used to talk and share information. No one could ever see what we did. It's called talking. No evidence afterwards. And parents never wondered, what are they doing in there? They just assumed we were doing what teens do. And generally speaking, online, that is what teens are doing. They're doing what teens do. They're being themselves. They're not pretending they're somebody else. They're not out there trolling, trying to convince other people to buy a timeshare in the Everglades. You know, they're just meeting and socializing and connecting. So kind of every aspect of this that we look at is the double-edged sword. It's dangerous and it's awesome at the same time. And we just have to figure out how to manage the dangerous. So I divided this up into like 3 elements. So there's what I term screen time, the negative, positive impacts of that. Social media, which you kind of have to take on its own. And one thing we haven't talked about tonight, which is gaming. And, you know, I work with a lot of teenage boys. I've been doing this for about 25 years. And that whole world has changed dramatically. And in some odd ways for the better, but we'll kind of get into that in a minute. So right now, the average teen, tween, spends 6 to 9 hours a day on technology of some sort. That's a pretty high level of time to be impacted. The screen time factor has many negative impacts. Obviously, I have a son who has to wear glasses because of how much time he stares at screens. Now, in his defense, he is a computer science major, but still, that's not where he spends most of that time. The average, this is the majority of teens, actually sleep with their phone in the bed because they don't want to miss anything, or they fall asleep on social media or texting. And studies will show that even just the light from your phone in the middle of the night actually disrupts your sleep, let alone if you have any kind of alert or buzz that happens when something posts. So then you have these kids tired in school the next day. It's affecting their learning, affecting their focus, and even their ability to socialize, which is ironic since that's what they're up trying to do in the middle of the night. And then you have kids who are experiencing anxiety because what if they miss something? They're grounded from their phone and it's as if you like took away the world. I've had kids like literally having anxiety attacks in my office because their parents demand their phone. And the entire time, and the parent just wants the phone for a 45-minute session, and the kid's freaking out on what they're missing during the time they're talking. So it becomes very addictive. And if you just look at what the definition or layman's definition of addiction might be. I mean, we are obviously, and I say we because most of society suffers from it, we're obviously addicted to technology. And I think that's the first thing you got to look at is this isn't avoidable. I sometimes tell my own kids that I was born at the wrong time because I think I could do without it, and I just as soon not have the headaches. But that's not the world, and nobody else is going to do them without it. You know, that being said, I did get here today via GPS, so I guess maybe I couldn't do without it. One of the interesting things that comes up is like this constant flow of drama that's on social media in particular, but definitely the internet in general. Dramatic stories, horrific tales of, this or that, or your friends, strangers, it doesn't really matter. But the brain, especially of an adolescent, becomes overwhelmed by that. And it actually, they have like an emotional overload. So one of the big concerns from a psychological point of view is reduction of empathy. So we actually reach a point where we just kind of shut down to this stuff. You hear these horrible stories and you're like, that's too bad. And you just kind of go on, and adolescents are worse. So they're at a time that they are actually, their minds and bodies and skills of socialization are developing at such a rapid speed, and they're taking in all this information, they can't really handle it. So I mean, on the negative concerns of the constant 24/7 access that we have to this technology, that's one of the biggest concerns, is how are our brains absorbing it? Are our brains absorbing it? And in fact, is it actually making us shut down completely to it? So, in the excessive screen time, obviously solutions are pretty simple. Turn it off. Have a bedtime for the kids' phones. I remember when my kids first got phones, because it got harder to take them away later, we had a docking station in the hall. Everybody's phone had to be checked in by a certain time. Then as they get older, I try and trust them with the responsibility to manage it. And I try to trust because I don't really, and I always check in to make sure they actually don't have the phones in bed with them. So, your online time is ironically, based on studies, isn't actually stopping kids from having healthy relationships, because that's a big fear we have too. These kids are always online, so when are they talking? When are they developing face-to-face social skills? And we're actually, so far via however you can study that, we're not seeing a dramatic change in the ability of adolescents to interact with one another. In fact, they actually have more enhanced social relationships than we used to because they talk to each other more often, just in these various formats. I'm going to shift gears real quick because I know we're short on time. Gaming. So do many of you guys play video games, or have you played video games? I know it's guys, they're going to be answering most of these questions. How many guys play online? You guys ever play against friends, old high school or college buddies? So that's kind of a really cool nuance that video games have taken on in the last, I don't know what it's been, maybe 10 years. That you can now take an old college friend. I was listening to a story somebody shared the other day of a high school buddy that he keeps up with, and they get online and they play Call of Duty, once a week, once every other week. The high school buddy is actually in Afghanistan. So he said basically if it wasn't for Call of Duty, he wouldn't talk to this guy at all. So they would have lost touch. He's not going to probably have been writing him letters. They were just friends in high school. But he said basically they get online and it's 1999 again, and they're playing violent video games, which seems a little odd for somebody in Afghanistan, but I've had a couple patients who told me they did the same thing. So the view of the gamer, the traditional gamer, used to be a kid that spent most of his time in his parents' basement. We were afraid he didn't have any friends, probably lacked complete social skills, and we worried he would spend the rest of his life in his parents' basement. Now, actually, those kids in particular, those are a target concern. I've worked with those kids for years, and I'd spent that conversation with them many times, like, okay, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? You can't stay in your parents' basement. But these kids are now developing friends. Like 89% of kids that play video games say they play online with a friend, somebody they actually know in real life, and enhance their relationships with those friends through video games. It's pretty cool. 54% of kids say they actually play with people that they've only met online, but play recurringly with them and consider those people friends. I thought that was totally weird, and I always air quote friends when I talk to kids about their online friends. So this is a story that came up in therapy a couple weeks ago, and I think it was really funny. There's a kid named John who's, I guess he's not a kid now, he's 21, but I've known him for a long time. But he is that proverbial kid. He keeps being brought in by his parents because they're worried about he has no social relationships. He appears to only have one friend. I got to help him connect with people socially. So he was telling me a story about being at a video game convention. So he and his friend are standing in line waiting to see the person who's doing the presenting. And the guy in front of him is talking to the presenter. And John taps the guy on the shoulder. He's never met. John does not like talking to people. And he goes, "Hey, is your gamer tag blah, blah, blah?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, it is." John recognized his voice from playing online. And this guy is now a friend of his. They go to these conventions together. I would never have guessed that you could make an actual friend from playing online. I actually talked to my son today about it, and he has two friends one guy's from Ohio, and I think the other's in Illinois that he's played recurringly with for the last 2 years. And they're both guys that he only met through a video game. So one of the great things about this medium for this particular group of kids is it's a place where the socially uncomfortable, maybe sometimes socially intimidated kids, boys, can now go where they feel at home, they have a commonality, and they're actually working, kind of integrating together to solve problems. I was actually listening to two of my sons playing Destiny last week, and my oldest is basically leading a group, and he's telling people what to do and where to go, and they're all kind of communicating back and forth. Now, my two sons are on two separate systems in the house, but there are one kid that my son went to high school with in Minnesota, one kid in Iowa, and a kid across town, and they're all coordinating this attack on this whatever they attack, I don't know. But I thought it was pretty impressive because my son is not a leader. And I'm watching, and there he's just totally demonstrating, pretty good leadership skills in this medium because it's his comfort zone. Now, for years, people have lauded sports as this great opportunity to develop teamwork and leadership, and you never get a group of parents together and go, what are we going to do about these adolescents in sports, huh? So, but here in gaming, these kind of kids are developing those same skill sets, and we just have to teach them to generalize them to the rest of life. So and shockingly good things are coming out of this. There are actually programs where the military is actually recruiting gamers to train them to be drone pilots because they're so comfortable in that medium. Now, the negative in that is some of these gamers, part of why they're being recruited is they've become so desensitized to the violence that they see in the video games that they don't have the emotional reaction. So again, the double-edged sword. Social media is kind of the area that I think everybody has the biggest concerns about. And, so just quickly running through them, I know some of it's repeating: the cyberbullying, trolling, increased depression and anxiety, especially for girls who are constantly comparing themselves to others, and thanks to social media, they can constantly compare themselves to others, literally. And then, of course, just the random negative comments or posting of inappropriate pictures or personal issues online. All those are real things. I can't say they're not the negatives of the internet. The flip side is there are some positives that are out there too. Essentially this was like, the social media in particular, I feel like is like a sharp knife. And I was somebody who kept my kids from sharp knives for a really long time. I was cutting their food for far longer than I needed to. So giving them the sharp knife enables them to do all sorts of things, enhance their social skills, learn things, commiserate, and get cooperative information from people who are experiencing similar things in life. But out there is the ability to hurt yourself, to react to information and negative things that are happening that you don't have the emotional skills yet to manage. This is how I think a lot of parents, I talked to a kid yesterday who's 14. He has no social media, which is fine, that's great, it's rare. And he's frightened of it. His parents have done, I suppose, a good job of making him think that all things bad exist in social media. But a lot of parents try that, and most kids are far more knowledgeable than their parents of social media, of the internet in general. We were just listening to a conversation about the kind of somewhat the big three of social media, and I think did anybody not know what Snapchat or Instagram was before they showed up tonight? Okay, wouldn't have guessed. But seems like I'm constantly being told of social media sites I never heard of. Kick, Tumblr, Whisper, never heard of any of them until patients told me about them. And why did they get on them? Because their parents took away Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. So you can run, but you can't hide. So teaching kids how to react to the internet and the frequency they're on it obviously is important. This is especially true if you have a kid who struggles with anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues, self-confidence. Being out on the internet where, whether right or wrong, they're comparing themselves isn't going to be in their best interest. Now, one of the funniest things that I came across while I was doing some research was, and when you hear it, you're like, well, duh. The internet, the way kids are reacting on the internet, what's happening on the internet, is pretty much what was going to happen to those kids anyway. Essentially, the bullies are bullies, the bullied are bullied, and those that lack self-esteem lack self-esteem. It's just happening all the time, and that's the biggest risk of it, is the volume. So, the message kind of at the end of all this is, as I looked at it, is, essentially the more things change, the more they stay the same. I couldn't have conceived when I was 18 of all the stuff kids are dealing with now, let alone when I was 13. But I was bullied. I did my share of bullying. I definitely had self-esteem issues, and I definitely looked at other people and thought they had things going on that I didn't. I didn't need the internet for that. So we haven't invented new problems. We've just increased the frequency of the existing problems. So as parents, I think, obviously that's the big question, is what do we do? You don't hide from it. This is kind of like leaning into it. I thought it was good advice that was given earlier. Get online, get your own accounts, learn how this stuff works, watch what your kids are doing, either as their friend or follow on these social media sites or by having their login information and checking in yourself. You know, and it's funny, some parents will have concerns over, oh, I don't want to alienate my child by, you know, invading their privacy. So I don't want to look at their social media. Did any of you kind of have that view of your kids' rooms where like, well, that's their sacred space, I don't look in there? I sure don't do that. I mean, I don't think I'd be able to get in the room if that was my policy. So, and I certainly advise all my clients. I mean, I always tell the kids when they say, well, my mom or dad came in my room. I said, you don't have a room. I said, you know, you have a space in their house that they let you live in. So, you know, I think essentially the internet's the same thing. You know, when you live on your own, you can have passwords. Till then, I get to see everything. You know, do I want to see everything? No, but I want the option. You know, and that's something I've been trying to tell parents for years. You don't want to see everything, just like nobody wanted to hear what we were talking about in the 80s. You know, we're in a panic about little things we hear, and they're the same little things teens have been talking about for years. You know, and I think we have to keep that perspective that we were once 15, 16, 17, whatever it is, and we were once curious about things that leads these kids to websites they shouldn't be at, but led us to other places we shouldn't have been. You know, we had conversations that we wouldn't have wanted people to overhear. You know, I personally remember getting in trouble for having one of them overheard. So, you know, we were smart enough not to write them all down, but, you know, it's a whole different world now. And I think we have to keep it all in perspective. You know, a rational reaction when these things happen. So when you're looking on a posting your child puts online that concerns you, freaking out, taking away their social media, probably just teaches them to go find another site or become more locked down or sneaky in what they're doing. Talking to them about the impact of what they're doing, whether that is when you're looking for a job, as somebody mentioned earlier. Actually, one of the ones that with my daughter, who was a big proponent of Twitter in her day, we talked to her about, she's in college now, was sororities are going to check your social media. You know, you're going to want to rush, and you're going to want these girls to accept you, and they're going to look at your social media, and they're going to look at inappropriate language or suggestive comments and those kind of things, and it's going to affect what people think of you. Job hunting, obviously. You know, but having that common sense discussion where you're not only discussing why this isn't okay, but how it might negatively impact them. Because we've told kids for years, I don't know about you guys, but the reason for everything when I was a kid was because my mom said so. And kids aren't buying. So having a conversation that says, this is why. It's not because it looks bad for me. It's not because I don't approve. It's because it's going to affect you negatively, and here's why. So I think that's the thing, is we kind of look at it like, this is something that's a change. Was it a change we wanted? Was it a change we didn't? It doesn't really matter. It's out there. It's not all bad. It's not all scary. It's, you know, I was actually just jotting down words when I was thinking about all this technology and you know, the internet, and unavoidable was the first word that came to my mind. When's the last day? Has anybody made it through a day in the last week where they didn't use the internet or technology in any way? And I doubt we would get a hand in any room in America. You know, it's just constant. It's the phone, I mean, I don't know, do any of you guys have like Google Home or an Amazon Echo? Yeah, I talk to the internet every morning. You know, what's the weather today? What time is it? What was the score of last night's game? So it's not going anywhere. And other words I wrote down: useful, positive, resources. I mean, these kids are learning things and know things at a level that we never did. How many of you went to the encyclopedia when your parents said, go look it up in the encyclopedia? You know, yeah, one. We got two, great. But what's that account for? Less than 10% of the room? So the reality is these kids, they Google it before I could even pull the phone out. I've got my 3 kids telling me different things about whatever it was we were talking about. Just the constant flow of information is a good thing. There's a lot of negatives that are mixed in there, and they do have an impact on kids' emotional well-being. We just have to be careful. It's the volume, right? It's the intensity, and it's the kids trying to deal with it on their own. And that you get a lot. You know, and the ones I get it the most from are the kids who feel like their parents don't understand. I can't really talk to my parents about this, which is cool. That's what I'm there for. But if their parents hadn't brought them to me, who are they talking to about it? You know, what somebody said about them online or how they feel. So making sure the conversation's open, and that has so much to do with your own reactions. All right? Kids are going to shut down immediately if you're going to take the, give me your phone, you're grounded for a year, you're off all social media. Okay, great, you can do that, but let's have a rational conversation first. Get them talking, figure out what's going on, make rational responses to the situation, and just have that common sense conversation with them of this is why it's important. We've talked about security and we've talked about privacy, and all these things are key features that a 12-year-old could care less about. So you have to make him understand why does that actually relate to him. Most of us, when the internet, all this stuff first started, our biggest fear was there's some 52-year-old deviant in a basement somewhere pretending he's a teenage girl talking to you and blah, blah, blah. And overwhelmingly, that is not what's on the internet. I mean, are there guys doing that? Yeah. But the average internet conversation, thanks to secured networks, we were just talking about setting privacies. You're in a network with people you know or know someone who knows. Most of the time, they're online being themselves, talking to you, same as you guys do. I'm sure there are some of us that make our Facebook life look a little brighter and shinier than our real life. But as a whole, we're sharing real things. We're being ourselves. And the adolescents and preteens, or whatever, they're probably even more genuinely out there being themselves because they've grown up with this. This is just their world. So I think just to close real quickly, we could probably talk all night about the topic, but we stay calm, be rational, create the conversation, and just sit down and talk to them. We don't have to be afraid of the internet. We can use it for the positives that it brings and minimize the damage that it can. Thanks for your time.